Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on the Dairy Signal. We're going to talk about how you can be a great boss or have better management with your employees. But before we dive into that topic this afternoon, let's take a second to talk about today in history. So today is actually one of my favorite fun facts in history because it's so different or unique, and it's never going to happen again, at least within my lifetime that I can predict. And given the chance that, this is a very unique situation, if you will. So we're going to jump back to 1944 with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he is elected to an unprecedented fourth term. So for those of you thinking, okay, 4 terms, that's not common. That doesn't happen nowadays. And that is, yes, very true. So a little bit of history about all of this and how this all went down. So from the time he was first elected to his presidency in 1932 to mid-1945, when he died while in office, Roosevelt presided over 2 of the biggest crises in U.S. history, which include the Great Depression and World War II. Unfortunately, because of the stress in a pre-existing condition, he did pass away while in office, which resulted in his vice president, which was President Harry Truman, becoming official president in 1947. And while he was in office, Congress actually proposed a law that would limit presidents to 2 consecutive terms. Up until this point, presidents had either voluntarily followed George Washington's example of serving a maximum of 2 terms, or they were unsuccessful in winning a 3rd term. Now, obviously, having had 4 terms, FDR definitely went just a little bit past that normal mark there. And it was in 1951, though, that the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution was officially passed, limiting a president's tenure to 2 terms with 4 years each. So interesting enough, and thus FDR remains the only president to have served more than 2 terms, and which I just find always very fascinating and interesting, especially given the time that he was president, in that it was not an easy time for him to be president, to do not only 1, not only 2, but 4 terms. Also, today is International Merlot Day, so if you're a wine drinker, grab a glass of that this evening. We all know it's a great way to unwind. And if you're not a wine drinker, have a beer, have some water, whatever suits your fancy, but you can celebrate in that way as well. Today, though, we are going to be jumping into how to be a great boss. What does that look like? And how can you set yourself apart, especially when it comes to being on farm? And joining us this afternoon is Tim Schaefer. He's a certified family business advisor and certified professional business coach with Encore Consultants. And for those who are joining us for the first time, or maybe joining us with Tim for the first time, we're excited to have him back. But Tim, before we dive into all things on how to be a great boss, would you mind giving those watching and listening a little bit of information about yourself so they get to know who you are?
Sure thing. Grew up on a family farm here in West Central Minnesota, and really for the last 20 some years, been working with family farms with transition planning, executive coaching, and also peer groups. So, and when I do get a little bit of extra time, I try to get out with my dogs and do a little bit of pheasant hunting. So.
Oh, fun. Good time of year for that. But we're excited to have you on here today to talk about all things management wise, especially with employees and being a great boss, regardless of where you kind of rank, because we all know that everybody has influence on others, especially when it comes to a business like a farm, where people are always interacting in various manners and degrees. So with all of that being said, I'm going to let you take it away here in a second, but I do want to remind people, if you are somebody who was like, I've got questions. I have this just sitting in the back of my mind, and I really want to pick somebody's brain on it in regards to employee management. What can I do to be a better boss, etc. This is your chance to ask all those great questions for Tim. So it's really simple to do that. It's to the right of your screen. There is a Slido feature. You can type that in if you're on a desktop device. If you're on a mobile device, you just scroll on down. You can type it in below, and that allows you to join the conversation. So make sure to take advantage of that this afternoon. That's what makes this fun. It's the back and forth. It's the questions that come in. We are more than okay with getting through as much content as possible, especially if there's great questions coming in. We love to see where it takes us. But with with all that being said, Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you to get started.
All right. Hey, thank you. The title is How to Be a Great Boss, but really that definition of what a boss is, it's changing. And the dairy industry is changing and labor is changing. And there's so many changes going on that really the conversation is shifting to how do I attract and how do I keep the employees that I have? And so that's what I call being the employer of choice, being that one farm in the community that really stands out, that the really top-notch employees all secretly want to work for because it has such a great reputation. And that's really what we're going to discuss today is what are some of the attributes and some of the tips, tricks that you can use to become an employer of choice, because labor will always be a challenge. But it doesn't have to be your Achilles heel, right? There are farms in your area, and hopefully it's your farm that really doesn't have, I would say, you'll never solve the employee challenge, but you can make it go away so that you can focus on, bigger and more important things. The problem is with employees is that you need them, right? Even if you have a fully robotic system, you still have employees, and they'll help you scale up. Scaling up, you cannot scale up without employees, but yet they complicate your life. Let's face it, they complicate your life. And then every time they come and they go, it's time consuming. And new employees wreck a lot of things, and they cost a lot of money, and they take a lot of your time and attention to really onboard them and do a lot of the things that it takes to, so that you can finally turn a profit on them. I had one employer lately, actually it was this week, said, it takes me 2 years before I make any money on a new employee. And I thought, wow, that's really a long time, but he's probably right. There are definitely some demographics that are working against us. This comes from the USDA, and it is mistitled because it says at the top that the population, the rural population, has declined. It has until the last 10 years. This I did not expect this. We saw a really big spike up in rural population during COVID, and then it's kind of kept going. And so there are more and more people. The great news is there's more and more people than 10 years ago that are in rural communities where typically we all live and work that we can hire. But here's the thing. If we look at that bottom line, they're not really going into agriculture. That the number of people working in agriculture has been flat to slightly down over the last decade, even as productivity has shot up. So I guess one thing, pat yourselves on the back, look at those productivity growth lines. But on the other side, wow, we're not picking up any more labor. So more people are not working in agriculture.
So Tim, I want to stop right there for a second right away, because I think you bring up a great point. We see it and we feel it, whether it's in dairy or other agriculture sectors. And I think many other businesses feel it as well, that it's just hard to find good people or good employees for the business that we're in, whatever that looks like. And you brought up a great point in the beginning that it feels like forever. And I mean this in the best way. It feels like forever to grow those employees who are the right fit for our business, and for them to be, those productive people within our teams. Now, I feel like the crux of it that we all find ourselves in at least a couple times in our lives that we all can share in is that sometimes you just need bodies. Sometimes you don't have the time to find those right people, to get them to wait to get them going. Sometimes you just kind of have to hire. Does that align with what you see currently in agriculture, or has there been a shift that we can wait a little longer, or maybe that we should wait a little longer to find those right employees? Because I think that makes a big difference when we're talking about this conversation, because who you're managing or who's on your team has a big impact on what that also looks like to be a boss. Yeah,
you bring up something really painful. to a lot of dairy farms, and that is, okay, so-and-so didn't show up for work, or I had to let them go, or they failed a drug test, whatever it would be. And now we just need a body. And so that's a very reactive position, and it stinks. It really stinks to be in. And yet sometimes that's where we're at. The antidote to that is always be looking for talent. That's one. So always be looking for talent, always be having those feelers out, even if you don't need them. And even though it may feel expensive, you might want to overhire. If you realize that you're going to have some turnover, or that you might have to let somebody go, or some employees becoming a little bit disengaged and you don't expect them to stay, start hiring before they leave. Get those feelers out there, because you don't really want to be caught in a reactive mode to now you just got to feel, I would say, somebody that can fog a mirror, because that really, you get too much of that and you can't get out of the spiral of you're not even managing at that point. It's as a manager, you're just reacting to emergencies. And yeah, you got to break that spiral. So I probably hire before you need to, if you think that there's going to be some turnover.
Okay. Thank you for addressing that,
Yeah.
because I know that it's a piece of the conversation, or at least it's something that always lingers in the back of mind when talking about this type of topic, because it is an issue, or it is something that we all have encountered or faced. So I just wanted to kind of address that at least lightly a little bit before we jumped into the full-on conversation about how to be a good boss and what that looks like.
Yeah. So really, we look at, let's just step back here and look at all ag production in general. It doesn't matter whether we're talking row crop, vegetables, or dairy. There's very few things out there that really truly give you a competitive advantage. I mean, they may for a year or two, but we all have access, or pretty much all of us have access to the same equipment, the same suppliers, right? We're going to the same conferences. We're here. We have a lot of this. We have very few secrets. There's very little that can truly differentiate a farm and get a long-term competitive advantage, except management in general. How farms are managed and how they're led, that is a huge competitive advantage. And frankly, there's a lot of farms out there. There's a lot of farmers out there that don't want to manage, and that's okay. That's their prerogative. But it definitely opens up the door for those that want to get really good at it. And it's really hard to replicate culture, a great work team, and things like that. I call it the last frontier, because pretty much everything else has been worked away. Let me give you an example. When I was younger, my grandfather said, and I was having a conversation with him, and I said, "Grandpa, what made you successful?" And he says, "I got out there early in the spring and then I drove straight." I said, "You drove straight?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "A good farmer would drive straight. They'd plant their corn straight, because then I could cultivate straight. I had better weed control, which means that I had better yield in the fall." I was like, "Oh, okay. That sounds good." Well, now weed control is done with spray. Everyone has GPS. And so that competitive advantage has gone away. That's just one example. Dairies have countless examples that would follow the same thing. The difference right now between one farm to the next from a production standpoint isn't really that great anymore. But how we lead in how we work with our employees, that is really what separates people out. And we look at dairy farms, and they're going through a lot of change, a phenomenal amount of change. And farms don't grow in a straight line. They kind of go through these, I'll call them fits and starts, right? They figure out something new, they expand their parlor, they pick up more acres, more cows, whatever. And they have this growth spurt, and then things get complicated. They have to hire more employees, and they tend to lose traction in that side to side movement where they're stuck. A lot of times this means that you need to hire employees and then delegate. And delegation isn't, well, I'm going to tell people what to do. Delegation is, as a manager and as a leader and as an owner, you get things that are 100% off your plate, so you no longer have to worry about them. You don't have to micromanage. You don't even have to deal with it. Now, do you keep your eye on it? Absolutely. But that's delegation, and then that allows your time to be freed up for other things. I love this quote. This is from a farmer in Kansas, and he said, "Farmer employees are not an expense." This gentleman grew his farm operation from about, I think it was around 11,000 acres with 9 employees to about 32,000 acres with 11 or 12. And so he got very, very efficient and very scalable because he was able to invest in his employees. And most of his employees have been there for 15 years. Very little turnover. And it takes an investment. It takes a long-term commitment. But it starts with hiring the right people. So if you want to, tip number 1, if you want somebody to stay in your farm, if you want that good employee to stay, be as predictable as possible. Even in the light of all of the busyness of the seasons and things like that, try to be predictable as a leader and as an owner. That means that have predictable meetings. If you're going to have employee meetings, have them the same date, the same time, for the same amount of for the same duration. Be proactive in your communication. I say, yeah, you're a dairy farmer, but being a great communicator should be probably the number 2, because in order to keep everybody on the same page, pulling in the same direction, you have to be able to communicate. And when we communicate, a lot of times, especially with family farms, we think, well, okay, we're family. We're all on the same page. We're related to each other. We grew up with our feet under the same table. We see each other every day. We know exactly what the next person is thinking. I'm going to say that probably isn't as true as what we all would like it to be, because people grow, they have life experiences, they get married. And a lot of times we're not as clear about our vision, about our core values, and the things that are important to us, like culture and even strategy. So be crystal clear. And I always like to say, write them down, get them out there, get them on paper, share them with the people that need to know what your strategy is, what your vision for the farm is. They will help you. Your good employees, they need more information, more than likely, than what you're giving them. And that is not to degrade anyone. I think we all, as business owners, fall into the trap of, we assume that people know more, or that they understand more of what's going between their ears than they actually do.
So Tim,
Go ahead.
before on to that, you bring up a really good point. You talked about family, and I feel like that's just always opening a can of worms, whether that be good or bad. I know can of worms is usually towards a bad thing, but sometimes it's good. If you're going fishing, it's a great time. But anyway, so when we're talking about family, I think you bring up a really great piece of this conversation, is that with family, oftentimes, whether that be siblings that grew up on the farm and 1 or 2, or maybe all, whatever that looks like, decide that they all want to be a part of the farm, and they're either transitioning more into a management role or whatever that looks like, it sometimes feels like that's where it gets hairy, where you have that family dynamic, but you're also supposed to have this business dynamic. And how do you keep them professional in those moments where you need to? Because if you're working with a lot of different people, it doesn't do good to have some of those old family habits sometimes sneak in when you're siblings. We all know what those situations are like. But also, how do you decipher that hierarchy? Because I think when we talk about this, oftentimes there's, those different roles that everybody finds themselves in, whether that be the place they want to be or the place they're growing to be. Sometimes that means one or more sibling technically might have more hierarchy. I think about this in a family friend where one became the herd manager of the overall herd, and another one was more part-time on the farm. But they still had to work together. They still had to have that family dynamic. But because they were related, more often than not, they found themselves butting heads in certain situations in which one did not agree with what was happening in the farm, on the herd, whatever it may be. So how does that family dynamic, unfortunately, sometimes play a role? And how does that look like for figuring that out in order to have the best culture, which it looks like we'll be talking about here in a minute, going forward for an overall farm and business? I'm sorry, that was very long-winded.
No, you bring up something that happens a lot, right? And by the way, and a lot of times we say, well, people aren't getting along. They must be flawed individuals, or they or it's so bad. We may see our neighbors or this or that. More often than not, these are really, really, really good people, right? They're good people, but they're in a dynamic that they're not used to, right? So how do you go from being brothers, right, with that brother rivalry, to all at once we're business partners, and we're business partners who are married, or we go from a dynamic where we listen to mom and dad because that's what we do, right? We if we don't want to be reprimanded and such, we listen to mom and dad, to now all at once we're business partners. And so finding that transition, it's really hard. However, this may sound way too formal, but when families go through it proactively, not reactively, it is so powerful, and the bond gets even stronger. And that is a discussion on core values. So a lot of conflict comes from a misalignment of core values. And what I mean by that is maybe one of the brothers wants to work 85 hours a week. And the other, he's single. Yeah, he wants to work 85 hours a week. The other one is married with 3 kids. And they're like, no, I'm really good at 65 on average, or 60, or whatever that number is. Who's right and who's wrong, right? There is no answer to that. But we do know that if big hours are part of the culture, then they have to be in alignment. Otherwise, there's going to be conflict. Risk taking, we see that as another area. Compensation, do we all get paid the same, even if we're not bringing the same value to the farm? A lot of times the answer is we need to take a page, not from the family book, so to speak, but from the business book, and maybe professionalize the farm a little bit more at every step. So most businesses that I know that are not family owned, they definitely talk what's our mission, vision, and values, right? And farms really need to do the same thing, so that they understand, hey, this is our code of conduct. This is what we're going to hold ourselves to, our standard. Because once they're clear, they'll be able to bring it forth. They'll be able to bring it to their employees. But if you have one brother operating, as an example, with one set of standards and values and behaviors that he thinks is okay, and the next one, man, now you've really confused your employee base. And confusion is never really a good answer. So if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So having that, so once you figure out your values and your culture, and say, yeah, we're still in alignment here. What's the vision look like? What does the farm look like in 3 years? I always say, you know what, go out 3 years. We can all plan 3 years. Maybe not 10 years. Dairy is changing, way too fast to say our farm is going to look like this in 10 years. But we can do 3. 3 is kind of the magic number, in my opinion. And make it crystal clear. Share it with the employees, because your employees, they will help you solve the problem. Your good employees, if they only understood where you want to go, they'll help you. Amber, I use an analogy. If I were to give you some puzzle pieces, and 100 puzzle pieces, and threw them out on a table, eventually you and everyone else could solve that puzzle. Okay. But that isn't what puzzles do, right? They come with a picture. They come with a vision of what it's going to look like when all the pieces fit together. And that's how clear you need to be, preferably written, with your employees, with your family. Because when it's that crystal clear, everyone around you is going to help you solve the puzzles. So you don't have to solve it 100% yourself.
So, but with Tim, I do have to ask a question, and I think we're going to jump right into it here. Whether that be a family farm or whatever it may be, sometimes it just gets lost in the shuffle about the idea of, okay, we should be planning ahead more. Like, I know a lot of people, they look at a year because that's oftentimes what their balance sheet looks like, and it helps plan for the year ahead. But when you talk about what's the next 3 years look like, there's just so much mystery to it. And so what do you do then? What do you do to get people on the same page?
We're not asking anyone to foresee the future. That's a fool's errand, right? No one has a crystal ball. But we should be able to plan out. I mean, let's just say you're putting in a digester. Yeah, 3 years is probably, by the time you conceive the idea, do the research, things like that, that certainly probably feels a lot better than doing the whole thing from start to finish in 6 months. Probably you'll make better decisions. And so I say that vivid visions should be things that you can control or heavily influence. Because, and if you can't control it or influence it, don't put it on your vision. It still may be important, but it's nothing you can do anything about. And probably the biggest mental block that farmers fall into is that there's nothing I can do because my profits are dictated by what I sell my milk for. The weather dictates this and all that. Guess what? Everyone is in the same boat. All of your neighbors are in the same boat. And so and yet we all know there's going to be survivors in dairy. So what can you control or influence beyond that, beyond the things that you can't? And, values and visions and some of these things, I mean, everything that we're going to talk about are things that you can either control or heavily influence. Amber, did that help you? Did that answer that question?
I think it does. I think it helps that it's not always what's happening right in the moment, or like you said, you're getting that crystal ball out, because that's not the goal of it. So I think it helps with the idea of what people should be doing when thinking about that 1 to 3 years or whatever that looks like for their farm.
Yep. So then the strategy comes up, right? So we have the values and the vision. Well, the vision without some sort of a game plan, right? It needs a strategy. And that's not complicated. A lot of times it's what is the most important thing we need to be doing in the next 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, this year, as an example. Who's going to be doing it? And how are we going to do it? You answer those 3 questions, man, you can start popping off all sorts and really chipping away at that vision, because it won't happen. That vision won't come all by itself. It's going to take work outside of the day-to-day, more than likely. Tip number 2, if you want somebody to stay, provide structure and accountability. A lot of times we think that people want to work on our family farm because of freedom, because that's what we value. We value having freedom and being able to come and go kind of as we see fit. That's kind of some of the family dynamics creeping into the business. But the employees, they really crave structure, and they want to know what they are accountable for. So if you have a good employee, the worst thing in the world you can do is micromanage them. Give them full accountability. Let them figure out how to do the job within parameters, and then turn them loose and let them go. Don't breathe down their back. But that means that there's some structure in place so that you don't have employees doing whatever they want, and you as an owner have no idea what's going on, right? So it needs structure, but then that structure creates that accountability, and employees thrive. Your best employees thrive under accountability. The employees that don't, when they're accountable for entire work areas, employees that don't work so well in this structure are probably not your best employees anyhow. On a family farm, a lot of times there's this idea, dairy farm, row crop farm, whatever, is that we're all family. We all love each other. We all help each other. We don't need this structure. And I can't tell you how many times we hear the conflict that arises when people are sticking their noses in other people's business and there's unclear expectations and such like that. So family farms, they need structure, especially around, we call them org charts or accountability blueprints. So that people aren't stepping on each other's toes and they have room to breathe and to thrive and to really embrace their work without having somebody else take it from them or breathe down their back. So tip number three, if you want them to stay, make them proud to be on your team, right? I hate to say it, there's in small towns, there's always gossip, there's always talk. But what happens, what do you think your employees say when they go home and talk to their family and to their wife? Are they complaining what it's like to work on your farm? Are they unhappy? Are they just there for the paycheck? Or are they bragging about it? Are they so excited to be part of your team? If we think about it, we all love to be on a winning team. I think we can all remember, if you played sports, our favorite coach, right? They did a lot for us. They made us feel special. They made us successful. They put us in a spot where we could play to our strengths. All of these things make it part of a winning team. And we need to be really careful that we keep that team mentality. Now, a team is not just a collection of people. That's not say, well, just because we have 6 employees or 26 or 266 that we have a team. No, teams are deliberately built and cherished and nurtured, and people will get moved around, right? It's different than just a collection of people.
So before we move on from that, I want you to dive into it just a little bit further, if you will, because when you say you want, your employees to be proud of the team that they're on. And then you mentioned, think about those coaches or those people in your life that you're like, oh, they really stand apart. But what makes those people stand apart, or what makes those teams specifically stand apart in a way that people are able to rally around it? Because I think that is something that makes, certain teams, whether that be sports teams, whether that be teams that you're working on, whatever it is, unique, is that some of them just have it. They click, that coach is motivating in whatever way, or that boss is able to really rally people around the cause of whatever it is that they are for their business. But I feel like there's certain characteristics that help guide that along, or certain things that they do that help create this ability to be proud rather than just it happening, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. So if we let's just maybe stick with we can stick with the sports analogy. First of all, a good team has an objective, right? They want to win. And so first of all, you have to define, what does winning look like? Like, what does winning look like? Is this year, does winning mean that we've cut the cost of production? Does it mean that we're getting more pounds of milk? Does it mean that there is an objective and it's clear? That could be part of the vivid vision. So first of all, what are we trying to accomplish? And the coaches make that really clear. The second thing they do is they have a plan. They have a plan of how they're going to chip away at this. And that could be, military, they have a plan. My son just got done playing football. There was a plan for every single game that was slightly different, but they all knew what the plan was. So don't keep that plan. The worst thing you can do probably with a plan is only drip and drab it out to them day by day, right? They need to see the big plan and understand it from A to Z. The second thing that great coaches, in fact, I don't even like to use the word boss anymore, because that whole concept is shifting. It's more of you get good employees and then you coach and mentor them. So I think really the coaching analogy is probably best. But they make sure that they keep score, right? So data is so prevalent in dairy. It's so awesome. I get so excited working with dairy farms compared to maybe some other types of farms, because you guys have so many data points that you can pull from to let your team know, are we winning? Are we making progress? What's our cost of production? What is our, what is our, you name it. You have so much data. Let your team know what that is, and they will help you. They'll help you solve the puzzle. And then the final thing is, they look at each person not as a body, but they look at, a great coach will say, here's where you're at today. Here's where I think you can be, and I'm going to coach you to your strengths. So instead of trying to put somebody that weighs, as an example, 130 pounds, and they're going to be, a defensive lineman. No, you put the really big guy on the defensive line, because that's what he's suited for, right? So you're coaching to the strengths. Not every employee that you have can be a good milker. Not every employee that you have can be really good at feeding, right? So coach them to their strengths versus what you feel you have a warm body, or that you just need somebody to fill a slot. So have a clear objective. Let them know the plan beyond just the day-to-day. Make sure that they have a compelling scorecard so that they know if they're winning, and then coach them to their strengths.
I think that helps when talking about this. And I appreciate you going through those steps for it, because it sounds great. Big picture wise, it always sounds great, but it's like, how do we achieve that? So thank you for diving into that just a little bit more there.
Yeah. Let's think a little bit about the brand. Now, most dairies, they say brand. We don't think of ourselves that way, but your farm has a brand, whether you know it or not. And so my advice or my encouragement would be is pay attention to your brand, pay attention to your image. And I'm not saying that your pickup truck has to be clean all the time and that you got to have, fancy sign out at the end of the driveway. That's all fine and good. But I'm saying, have your culture is going to be part of your brand as well. And let me give you an example. There are some farms in our community that, and in probably all communities, when the farmer goes uptown or when the employees go uptown, they have their clothes look like they had wild goats chasing after them most of the day, right? They're raggedy, they're filthy, they got grease all over. And then there's other operations that, yeah, they smell like a cow, and they're in their rubber boots, but they've washed their rubber boots off the best they can. They've, they just present themselves just a little bit better. That's just one example. Another thing about branding is, high visibility. We think of that as a safety item, like we're going to have all of our employees in high vis. But it also does something else. It says that when your employees go uptown, when they're going on that parts run or something like that, it says we care. It says that we are professional and that we care about the safety of our employees. And so just be really careful about the message that you send at all points.
So Tim, I actually want to push back on that a little bit. And the reason
push back away.
Because I totally understand with like the high vis or that type of idea and the mentality, because it is a huge advantage to have high vis on the farm and all of that good stuff. But the part before that, when you're talking about, the way that you look, and I think that depending on who you are and who's listening, it can rub you the wrong way. And I mean that in a polite way, because I understand, we all want to be professional. We all want to go, whether that's running to wherever. But I also understand from a lot of dairy perspectives that sometimes you're just running down to the feed mill. Sometimes you are going through their other way. And like
Right.
you change your boots, but you don't have, it doesn't make sense to change your entire outfit when you're going to a place where
No,
that's appropriate. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think the way that at first that part came off is that you always have to be all buttoned up when
no,
we know in the dairy sector that that's not necessarily the case. And I know you didn't mean like that nobody needs to be in a suit and tie type of situation. And
no.
I know it's over exaggerating on this part of the conversation, but I just want to have people remember that it's not, yes, the way we look and the way that we present ourselves matters, but also in the dairy sector, we do recognize that there's a time and a place. And I think that's an important aspect to draw into this conversation. So some people are not just turning this off and thinking, this guy, I appreciate what he has to say, but
He's out of touch. No, and thanks for pushing back and clarifying that. Let me back up just a little bit. Absolutely, you don't have to button up. I mean that's, but it goes. If you can, wash the grease off your arms, right? At least kind of wash up just a little bit. Let me just give you an example, and I've only seen it a couple times. One was I was at a farmer's market in Connecticut. Now, Connecticut's kind of a blue blood place. And so you got to know your audience. And I think and it was a farmer's market, and there was this farmer there selling beef, grass-fed beef. And but the thing is, he was selling grass-fed beef, but his cap was filthy. His hands were dirty. His shirt was ragged. And it was like, okay, you're trying to sell something, you're trying to build something here, but you're not really representing yourself well. Right next to him was somebody else. They weren't fancy. They weren't buttoned up. They were in jeans, a t-shirt that wasn't even new, but they just totally different. Another instance was, I'm not even going to mention where I was in the country, but I was speaking at a dairy conference. And by the way, dairy folks, they really represent themselves well. Really, honestly, you do. But there were a few individuals that showed up straight off the farm. They still have manure going up the back of their leg, and they were in their farm boots. I'm like, you're at a conference. You're spending all day here. Be careful how you represent yourself and the brand, because we're all representing the industry. So yeah, sometimes it's as simple as, if you can, wash up your hands, take the grease off your face, and go. And sometimes, when you're going a little bit farther out, yeah, probably shower and change clothes. So.
Well, and that's exactly it. I just wanted to clarify that point because, again, there's a time and a place, and it's not like you're walking into the grocery store with crap on your hands and boots and all that good stuff. It's just that phrasing it in this way or providing those examples helps put into perspective that, yes, what you are representing your business, your dairy, and the people that are a part of it as well. So thank you for just diving into that a little bit more, and I will let you continue on.
You bet. If you want somebody to stay, tip number 4, hire people that your employees want to work with. Let's think about it. Go back to the team analogy. We love to work. We love to be on people we want to be on the same team with people that are capable, competent. They want to be there, right? Your employees are the exact same way. They want to work with capable, competent people. And one of the ways, unfortunately, one of the main reasons why really good employees walk is because they have to work. They get so frustrated working with people that do not have the same amount of desire. They don't care. They don't have the same standards. And so after a while, good employees can walk. So in order to build a really great team and to be an employer of choice, as much as possible, hire people that they want to work with. And this means sometimes asking their opinion. I'm aware of some farms where they let the employees actually hire. So that isn't something that the quote unquote boss does. Yeah, the boss probably has the final say, but they do all the recruiting and they do all the interviewing and such like that. And if you think about it, it can kind of make sense. Who's going to care more about who they work with than the ones that have to look at them every single day? And so, yeah, as much as possible, look for compatibility. So you're not just throwing random people together and then trying, and then wondering why they're not getting along. So on the people side, hire for fit, right? So if you're really clear about your culture and your core values, that should be your first level of how you sort people out. So often, I think we're going to assume, for the sake of this, Amber, that we're beyond that. Hey, we just need somebody that can fog a mirror. So if you are afforded a little bit of time, look for people that are going to fit your culture, that have the same core values. And then after that, go back and say, yes, we're going to hire for the skill set that they have. If they have it, great. If they don't have it, hey, we've got a good onboarding process where we can onboard, coach, mentor, and train them, instead of flipping it the other way. A lot of times, well, I guess, have you ever worked with somebody that was super talented? They had all the right skills, or resume looked great if they did have a resume, but they just didn't fit in and they caused more problems. And by the time they left, the whole team was in an uproar. This happens because they're just not a great cultural fit, but they have all the skills.
So I want to ask a question on that real quick. When we're talking about hiring for fit, I think it's a very easy thing to say, but how do you know if somebody's going to be a right fit for your operation? Especially, when you're in an interview, they put on their best face, they put on their best self, they're selling themselves. And sometimes you can figure it out right away. And those people who are going to fit, or those people who are not. But when you also, encounter those people where they could go either way, they're about that 50-50. What do you do then? How do you know if they're going to work within that employee system, or do you give them a shot and have a probationary system and see if it works? What do you do with those in between? Because sometimes we're encountered with that. We're like, this might be a really, really good way to go, but it could go really south or really bad really quick.
Yeah. And let's be fair, we don't know. Like I've made hires that I thought were going to be fantastic and they were disasters. And I think each one of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we've done the same thing. So you never really, truly know. But the one thing that is really hard to fudge in an interview are their core values. And you can suss that out by the type of questions that you ask them about really what's important to them. And we don't walk around spouting off our core values and things like that, but we all have them. And I think it was even Elvis Presley said, core values are like fingerprints. We leave them everywhere. And so the person that's sitting across from you in the interview, they've left their fingerprints of core values throughout their life. And if you ask them about past events, past work, things that intrigued them, things that motivated them, things that demotivated them, you're going to find out. It's what we call behavioral interviewing. You're going to find out what their values are. And if their values aren't in alignment, they probably won't work. If they kind of pass that value test, then you kind of go back to, okay, do they know the job? Right. So that's kind of are they the right person? That's the value screen. And then are they the right fit? Are they in the right spot? You say, well, do they know the job, or am I confident that they can quickly learn it? Because that's important. We got to get them up to speed. We got to build that competence level. Do they want it? Do they truly want the job that you're offering? Can they convince you, or can you be confident that they wake up every day saying, I am a milker. I am a good milker. I want to be a milker. And this is what I've been called to do. Because if they don't want it, you can't really make them want it. And they may be just doing that job just until something better shows up. And so you kind of want to filter that out. And then finally, the third check that they have to pass is, do they have the capacity for it? Do they have the mental capacity? Do they have the time capacity, the physical capacity? there's lots of different ways to look at that. So yeah, so values, are they the right person? And then do they know it? Do they want it? And do they have the capacity? That'll get you a long ways. Will it ever be 100%? Absolutely not.
Well, and thank you for that, because I think sometimes we get so stuck on that it has to be the right person and we know it's going to fit and we know it's going to work and then get really defeated when maybe that one person we thought was going to be the shining star just kind of falls flat or whatever the case may be. So thank you for going into that a little bit more. I'll let you talk about strategy number 5 here. And then I've got a question that came in a little bit earlier that we'll address before we wrap things up here today.
Oh, yeah. So the 5th strategy is put people in a place where their strengths can shine. Instead of putting people in a spot where you have a need, don't be afraid to reshuffle your employee mix so that your employees are in a spot where their natural tendencies, traits, training, their desires, where they can all shine forth. As an example, we would never hire, there's no farm that would ever hire a CPA who didn't like numbers. So let's not do it to our employees. Let's hire our employees and put them in a spot where their strengths can shine. And sometimes we don't know what those strengths are. And so that really dovetails into what we were just talking about, is once you get them hired, it's really, really important that you spend the time coaching, mentoring, and having a really good, solid onboarding process that probably lasts longer than a week or two. Depending on the position, this could easily run 6 months, like a herdsman or something like that. Yeah, easily 6 months, to where you're still really hands-on, checking in with them, having coaching and mentoring conversations and things like that. So you have a question?
Yes, we have a question that came in, and it came in a little bit earlier. And it hasn't really hit quite on the strategies or topics we've talked about thus far, but it did hit on one of the slides you had way at the start, and that was about delegation. And this person, they have the question of, I didn't plan to have to manage people when getting into dairy. I have a few employees, but as we continue to grow, I'm finding it harder being off the farm and knowing when to delegate versus doing it myself. And I think this is a common crux that a lot of people encounter, because again, it's another thing that's easier said than done.
Delegation is hard. I put it underneath maybe a broader category of enabling others, because I think delegation means different things to different people. Some people look at delegation as, I have a task list, I tell people what to do and they do it. That's probably the most common. But delegation, first of all, you got to have the right people, right? If you don't trust your people, if you don't have confidence in their ability, then unfortunately, you're probably not ready to delegate to that individual. But when you have confidence in their abilities, and that person is willing to accept the mantle of accountability, there's a lot of really good employees out there. They do not want to shoulder the burden of being ultimately accountable for a certain work area. And that's okay. But some people are perfectly okay with that. So you need to know who those people are. So you got to hire right. And then it's really about delegating full authority and responsibility, so that you don't have to micromanage. You don't have to check in. You just know that it's being done. And that will allow you to breathe so much easier. And if you're not quite there to where you can walk away and you know that I don't have to check in, because I know that if there's a problem, I'll get a phone call, and that's okay. We'll talk it through. That's kind of your sign, so to speak, that your people are ready. And delegation isn't one of those things where you kind of like halfway do it. When they're ready, you do it. You create the parameters that they're going to work within. Be really crystal clear what that looks like, and then step back.
I think that's a great way to look at it. And it's something that to think about. What does that look like for you? What are you comfortable with? But also, I love the fact that it's what are your employees telling you by their actions, by what they're doing, by how they're interacting. And that's a huge part of it all. So Tim, we are nearing that end of the time that we have with you here this afternoon, and it feels like it's just whizzed past. And we've gone over a lot of really good stuff, but what's kind of that one key message that you really want to leave today's audience with? Because there's been a lot that we've covered, but is there something that sticks out that's going to be really helpful for them as they think about this, about what it looks like for them, their business, their farm, leaving today's conversation?
Dairy farmers are very deliberate. They're very data driven. You have to be. You have to pay attention to the details. I work with row crop farmers as well, and I'm just amazed at the difference between dairy and row crop, because the attention to detail is so much higher in dairy. So I think everyone needs to pat themselves on the back, because you really, I mean, it's really amazing to see. So my encouragement would be, take that attention to detail, take that same mindset that you give your cattle and their well-being and what they need in order to thrive, and apply that to your employees. And take that same mindset and ultimately be very deliberate. You don't do anything on the farm production-wise without thinking it through and having a plan and a backup plan and such like that. Do the same thing with your employees. And if you are deliberate, if you have a plan and you're very deliberate, I genuinely think that you will be, if you're not already, you will be the employer of choice.
I think that's a lot of good things to be thinking about here as we leave today. So I want to say thank you, Tim, for your time, especially your expertise in this area and your insight for the questions that came in and all of that. So thank you so much for being here this afternoon.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I also want to say thank you to all of our sponsors at PDPW for making programs like the Dairy Signal possible. To learn more about them, who they are, and everything that they support, make sure to head over to our website. And while you're there, you can also check out what's coming up in the world of PDPW. We've got a lot of exciting things. We've got our Dairy Insight Summit coming up at the end of the month. We've got Dairy Managers Institute coming up here in December, which is crazy to think that that's only a month away. We've got we got our Managers Academy, that's going to be in Louisiana this year. So if you're looking forward to getting someplace warm in the month of January, check that out. But we have so much more going on, so make sure to head over to our website, see what's happening, and everything in between. We are more than happy to talk with you. If you got questions, give us a call, shoot us an email. But for now, thank you for joining us today on the Dairy Signal. Thank you to those who asked your questions live. And even if you're watching this after the fact, thank you for tuning in and joining us on this lovely afternoon. But for now, have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you here tomorrow on the Dairy Signal. Bye now.